Bonjour à toutes et tous. Aujourd'hui, dans le podcast de la semaine des lycées français du monde, nous allons à la rencontre de Farkhunda Muhtaj. Farkhunda est une footballeuse professionnelle et une militante associative. En tant que capitaine de l'équipe nationale féminine de football d'Afghanistan, elle a joué un rôle déterminant dans les départs de plus de 300 Afghans vers le Portugal, après l'arrivée au pouvoir du régime taliban. Elle se consacre à utiliser le sport comme outil pour venir en aide aux autres. Les questions seront posées en français et les réponses de Farkhunda en anglais.
Est-ce que vous pourriez vous présenter?
Yeah. Okay, so I am an Afghan Canadian immigrant. I came to Canada when I was 2 years old. My family is originally from Afghanistan, and my parents and family fled Afghanistan the first time the Taliban took over, so in the early 90s. And so growing up, I was very privileged to have so many resources and supports around me that so many of my Afghan citizens within the country didn't have. And so for me, it was really important to make sure that I took advantage of the opportunities that I had and that I really focused on my academics and athletics and be able to give back to Afghanistan and Canada in a substantial way. And my way of giving back ended up being through sport. I think sport is a universal language, and playing for the Afghanistan women's national team was so much more than just football. It was a way to shift stereotypes and norms within Afghanistan and change ideologies, and also work towards equitable opportunities for women and empower women in a large way. And so I started playing for the Afghanistan women's national team in 2016. Everything was going well. We were progressing very well. At the time, actually, though, because of the safety and security situation in Afghanistan, we never had our camps and competitions inside the country. So it would be in the Middle East or in the U.S. And the players from Afghanistan, half of our team, some of them lived in Afghanistan, and most of us, like myself, lived abroad. And so we would all get together, have training camps, compete in competitions, and FIFA sanctioned matches. But then in 2021, in 2018, that's when I became captain of the national team. Unfortunately, in 2021, the Taliban took over Afghanistan, and they banned women's sport in general and have restricted women in many different spaces in society. And so for that reason, we have been, under gender apartheid and banned to compete in competitions. And I was not born in Afghanistan, actually. My parents fled Afghanistan when in the 90s. I was born in 1997. But I came to Canada when I was 2 years old, so I was actually born in a neighboring nation where my parents were refugees, which was Pakistan. But of course, I am Afghan Canadian. I've been playing football since I was 5 years old. I just turned 26 a week or two ago. So, football for me has been more than just a game. It's been an instrumental way to give back to society.
Vous avez participé à aider les joueuses de l'équipe moins de 18 ans, féminine, à fuir l'Afghanistan à l'arrivée des talibans en 2021. Est-ce que vous pourriez nous raconter cette histoire?
Okay, so like I mentioned, in 2021, when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, I was discussing with the Afghanistan Football Federation our camp in September of 2021, where we were going to compete in the Asian Cup qualifications. And quickly our conversation went from the camp to them calling me and asking me to help evacuate the Afghan women's national team players because their lives were at risk. And so at the time, I had just graduated from university, so I completed my Bachelor of Science degree, and then afterwards my Bachelor of Education degree is what I graduated with in 2021. I was an assistant coach at York University, their women's soccer program. I was working full-time at the time. I was playing in the first division of the Canadian Football League. I was directing my own nonprofit organization, and in September of 2021, I was going to start my first teaching contract because I just graduated to become a high school science and phys ed teacher. And as I'm about to do that, of course, I get this phone call, and I have a nonprofit organization where we help refugees and newcomers resettle in Canada through soccer, through football. It's called Scarborough Simba. So I'm very much involved with the refugee and newcomer community. My parents were refugees before I was an immigrant to Canada. And something that really supported us was sport. So for me, it was a great way to bring about active change in my community. But that being said, although I worked in that space, I didn't have any diplomatic connections. And so I was calling a bunch of nonprofit organizations and humanitarian lawyers, and unfortunately I didn't get the answers that I was looking for. Long story short, I was able to be connected to the U.S. government and former intelligence officers and current government officials, and that's when I explained to them the sensitivity behind the girls and evacuating them. And they were very supportive of supporting me on this mission, which was fantastic. I won't bombard you with all the details of the mission because it was extremely difficult. It took well over a month to complete. So after we evacuated the families and the footballers, it was September 19th, 2021. And at this time I was teaching still, but working 24/7 towards this mission as well. And I was invited by the donors and government officials to come to Portugal for a couple days and surprise the girls and run a few training sessions. Long story short, I ended up leaving everything in Canada behind to live in Portugal to help resettle the families. As I was living there for a couple more months, I helped evacuate another flight of Afghans. So the first time we evacuated over 80 individuals. The second time was over 225 individuals. And I was coaching them, helping them with their education, their resettlement, their housing. So everything really, because there was no Afghan diaspora in Portugal.
Qu'est-ce qui vous a poussé à vous engager dans ce projet et à mettre votre vie et votre carrière entre parenthèses?
Great question. I just could not imagine leaving behind young women and girls who I saw myself reflected in. So that could have been me. I could have been in that precarious situation where I have no opportunities, where I am shunned from life, from progressing, from aspiring to achieve my dreams. And I saw that in those young girls, and I knew that had they stayed in Afghanistan, that would have been their unfortunate reality. And so when I got the phone call to help evacuate them, of course, adrenaline was running through me, and I didn't know how to do it, but I was committed to find a solution, and I was going to do whatever it took, because I knew that if they wanted to have the future that they, always dreamed of, that meant that their safety, their liberty, their freedom had to be intact. The nature of my commitment, literally since 2021, I've been spending almost 24/7 literally on the mission, 24/7 working on the Toronto time zone, the Kabul time zone, which is about 8 hours ahead of Toronto, working on the Montana U.S. time zone, which was 3 hours behind me, in order to evacuate the families and execute this mission. So literally had to be up 24/7. It was extremely risky, I'll be honest. The family members had to trust me blindly because I couldn't provide them with all the details because it would jeopardize the mission. Emotionally, it was very, very stressful, of course, for the families who are in a war zone where, the political landscape of Afghanistan was not secure at the time. There's bombings, there's shootings, waiting outside the airport to be able to get in. And it was extremely risky. And they pretty much had to risk their lives in order to get out of the country. But I made sure to be there, to empathize with them, to make sure that to the best of our ability, we were actually supporting them, and to ensure their safety at all times, despite how difficult that was. And it was a very difficult period of time for me as well, truth be told. Of course, this was my country crumbling right before my eyes. I never imagined that the Taliban would retake Afghanistan, and my parents fleeing and millions of people fleeing at the time would almost happen all over again. So that was really difficult. And at the time, while I was evacuating the families, my grandpa also passed away, my dad's father, and he was very close to us. And unfortunately, I couldn't attend his funeral processions and stuff, even though that is a huge deal in my culture and in my Islamic faith. But I couldn't be there for him, sadly, and it bothers me to this day. But of course, it's because had I been there, I would have had to leave behind some of my commitments for this mission.
Pourquoi avoir choisi le Portugal comme destination pour l'équipe? Comment ont-elles été accueillies? Est-ce qu'elles sont toutes encore installées dans le pays? Et comment ça se passe pour elles?
We were exploring many different countries throughout Europe. And first off, we wanted to obviously evacuate them to the U.S. That was our plan at the beginning. However, because the U.S. migration system was backlogged, and so were the visa processes, although we were working through government officials, that would mean that the girls and families would be in a refugee camp in the Middle East or Europe or somewhere for at least 2 years in limbo until they would finally be accepted to the U.S., or maybe even longer than 2 years. And we just didn't want that for them. We wanted them to leave in a dignified manner. And there were other potential nations as well. But the reason why we chose Portugal was because Portugal was, I believe, the only nation that was willing to accept their entire families. So many nations wanted to accept the girls only, but not their family members, and not their male family members specifically, but we didn't want to tear families apart. They were received quite well in Portugal. I think Portuguese people are very empathetic, very generous, so that was nice. Very good media coverage as well. Portugal was also very much praised, of course, because they were kind enough to accept us and, fantastic people in general. However, that being said, Portugal is not a nation that is experienced enough when it comes to supporting refugees, and also lacks resources. Nothing against Portugal. They're a lovely country, fantastic people. But because of those shortcomings, I think the resettlement process has been extremely difficult with budgeting and language barriers and, cultural barriers. So most of the families are settling in well. They go to school. They're playing for their local municipality club teams as well. Some of their family members have jobs. They're spread out throughout the country, though, so they don't see each other often, which is a shame. And when we have training camps, it's hard for us all to come together. But despite that, we make it happen. And yes, of course, I'm still in touch with the girls, very much so. We message very frequently. We have follow-up Zoom meetings almost every month for sure, or bi-weekly at some times. I set up internship opportunities for them, tutoring supports, and so on. We actually traveled to Sweden this summer. We had a camp in Portugal to prepare for the Gothia Youth World Cup in Sweden, because at the moment we cannot compete for Afghanistan officially, but unofficially we were able to compete in that, which was fantastic.
Finalement, qu'est-ce que cette aventure vous a appris?
I mean, I've certainly learned a lot throughout these couple of years, and it's exposed me to a lot of different work when it comes to diplomacy, bureaucracy, really governmental work behind the scenes. It's also exposed me to different policies around the world, so the refugee policies of Europe, the EU, versus North America or Canada. I've made really good connections and networks of people who are really empathetic and, work in this space as well. The most important thing I would say is that it's taught me that never give up, and you will never know your potential and your capabilities until you take risks and until you're determined to achieve those goals. And life is extremely unpredictable, but you got to own every moment, and you can make that substantial difference. So a lot of people, they all always think, like, I'm one individual. What can I possibly do to change the world? No one said you're going to change the world, but you can make an exceptional difference in this world if you only believe yourself. So when I got that phone call from the Afghanistan national team, I could have thought to myself, like, I'm one person. What can I possibly do to make a difference? But once you actually push yourself and find solutions to your issues and problems and really do a deep dive into what you're trying to achieve, doors will open up for you. You just need to remain persistent, consistent, and dedicated to your cause. And that's what I've learned. And ever since then, I never take that as an excuse that I'm just one individual. What impact can I have? Each individual is unique and they bring so much to the table. And, 7 billion people say that every single day. So just imagine if we all actually work towards that. So I don't want to overwhelm you. Again, I'm happy to follow up with any questions if you still have. I'm going to send you the link of the documentary. Please watch it. I don't think I necessarily answered all the questions in full detail, in the detail that you deserve. However, if I do, I think we would go on forever because this was an incredible, obviously, mission. But in order to simplify it, I felt this was the best way. Anyways, thanks again. Please send my regards to the girls, the students in general. And I hope to cross paths in the future. All the best.
Merci Farkhunda d'avoir pris le temps de répondre à nos questions et d'avoir partagé avec nous une partie de votre histoire. Nous espérons que cela puisse inspirer d'autres personnes à s'engager. À bientôt.